What pain was considered normal in medieval daily life? When we think about pain today, we usually think of it as a warning sign. Pain means something is wrong. Pain means stop. Pain means go to the doctor, take medicine, rest, or change what you're doing. In the modern world, pain is something to be avoided, reduced, or eliminated whenever possible. But in medieval life, pain was not a signal to stop. Pain was not unusual. Pain was not alarming. Pain was normal. For most people living in the medieval world, pain was simply part of being alive. It was woven into work, religion, medicine, family life, and even childhood. People expected pain the way we expect traffic, bad weather, or stress. It was uncomfortable, unpleasant, and sometimes terrifying, but it was also familiar. To understand medieval pain, we have to stop thinking like modern people. Medieval men and women did not expect comfort. They did not expect safety. And they certainly did not expect a pain-free life. Pain was constant, predictable, and accepted. Let's talk about the kinds of pain medieval people experienced every day, and why almost none of it would be considered acceptable today. Pain from work was expected, not avoided. Most medieval people worked with their bodies. Hard. Every day. From childhood to old age. There were no labor laws. No weekends. No ergonomic tools. No protective equipment. Work was physical, repetitive, and exhausting. Farmers woke up before sunrise and worked until daylight disappeared. They lifted heavy loads, dug soil by hand, harvested crops with sharp tools, and worked in every kind of weather. Back pain was universal. Joint pain was constant. Muscle strain was so common it wasn't even described as an injury, it was just part of being alive. If your hands cracked, bled, or swelled, that wasn't a problem. It meant you were working. If your knees ached constantly, that wasn't something to complain about. It meant you were doing your job. If your shoulders burned at night when you tried to sleep, that was normal. Craft workers weren't spared either. Blacksmiths stood near extreme heat for hours, inhaling smoke and fumes. Carpenters used hand tools that required force and precision, leading to chronic hand and wrist pain. Weavers sat for long hours in uncomfortable positions, causing back and hip pain that never fully went away. Pain from work wasn't something medieval people tried to eliminate. It was something they endured. Stopping because of pain was often impossible. If you didn't work, you didn't eat. If you didn't produce, you didn't survive. Pain was the price of living. Childhood pain was not protected against. One of the most shocking differences between medieval life and modern life is how children experienced pain. Today, we go to great lengths to protect children from discomfort. In medieval times, children were expected to tolerate pain early and often. Children worked. They carried water, gathered firewood, helped in fields, cared for animals, and assisted in workshops. Their bodies were smaller and weaker, but the expectations were nearly the same as for adults. Falls, cuts, bruises, and sprains were common. No one rushed a child indoors because they were hurt. Crying was tolerated briefly, but not encouraged. Pain was seen as part of growing up. Medical care for children was rare. If a child had a fever, toothache, or injury, families used home remedies. Pain relief was minimal. Surviving childhood itself was the priority, not comfort. Even learning involved pain. Corporal punishment was widely accepted. Being struck for mistakes was normal in schools, apprenticeships, and homes. Pain was considered a teaching tool. From a medieval perspective, learning to endure pain early made you stronger later. Dental pain was a fact of life. Few experiences were more universally painful in medieval life than tooth problems. Dental care as we know it didn't exist. People did not brush regularly. Sugar wasn't common for most people, but coarse bread, grit from millstones, and poor oral hygiene damaged teeth constantly. Toothaches were common, severe, and long-lasting. If a tooth became infected, the pain could last for weeks or months. There were no antibiotics. Painkillers were limited and unreliable. People tried herbal rinses, charms, or prayer. Extraction was the only real solution, but that was terrifying. Teeth were pulled by barbers, not dentists. No anesthesia. No sterilization. The pain of extraction was intense, but it was brief compared to the constant agony of infection. People didn't ask whether it would hurt. They already knew it would. The real question was whether the pain would finally stop afterward. Medical treatment itself was painful. In medieval medicine, treatment often caused pain on purpose. Doctors believed pain could drive illness out of the body. Suffering was not just expected, it was sometimes considered necessary for healing. Bloodletting was one of the most common treatments. The idea was that sickness came from an imbalance of bodily fluids, and removing blood would restore balance. The procedure involved cutting a vein or using leeches. It hurt, it weakened patients, and it was done repeatedly. Cauterization was another common practice. Wounds were burned to stop bleeding or prevent infection. The pain was extreme, but it was seen as life-saving. Surgery existed, but it was brutal. No anesthesia. No real pain control. Patients were held down while procedures were performed as quickly as possible. Pain during medical treatment wasn't a failure of medicine. It was proof that something was being done. If a treatment didn't hurt, people often doubted its effectiveness. Women were expected to endure pain silently. For medieval women, pain was deeply tied to social expectations. Pregnancy and childbirth were some of the most painful experiences of medieval life, and they happened often. Women typically had many children, with little spacing between pregnancies. There was no reliable pain relief during labor. Childbirth was dangerous, painful, and unpredictable. Women screamed, prayed, and endured. This was expected. Pain during menstruation was also poorly understood and rarely treated. Women were expected to carry on with work regardless. Women also suffered pain from daily labor, cooking over fires, hauling water, grinding grain by hand, washing clothes without soap or soft water. But culturally, women were expected to endure pain quietly. Complaining too much could be seen as weakness or moral failure. Pain was part of womanhood. Endurance was seen as virtue. Hunger pain was constant for the poor. Pain didn't always come from injury. Often, it came from hunger. Food shortages were common. Crop failures, bad weather, war, and disease could wipe out supplies. For peasants and laborers, hunger was not rare, it was seasonal. People lived with constant stomach pain. Weakness. Dizziness. Fatigue. Children went to bed hungry. Adults worked while underfed. This kind of pain was invisible but relentless. There was no expectation that hunger should be eliminated entirely. People hoped for enough food to survive, not enough to be comfortable. Hunger pain was endured with resignation, prayer, and community support when possible. Pain from clothing and living conditions. Even everyday comfort was rare. Clothing was rough. Wool scratched. Shoes had no cushioning. Ill-fitting garments caused blisters, sores, and joint pain. Homes were cold and damp. Sleeping surfaces were hard. Smoke from fires irritated eyes and lungs. Chronic headaches and breathing discomfort were common. Parasites like lice and fleas caused constant itching and skin irritation. This discomfort was so common it barely registered as a problem. Pain from environment wasn't dramatic, but it was constant. Religious beliefs changed how pain was understood. One of the most important reasons medieval people accepted pain was religion. Pain was not meaningless. It had spiritual value. Many believed pain was sent by God as a test, a punishment, or a way to purify the soul. Enduring pain patiently was considered virtuous. Some religious practices even involved voluntary suffering, fasting, long pilgrimages, uncomfortable clothing, or self-denial. Pain was seen as something that could bring a person closer to holiness. Because of this belief system, avoiding pain was not always the goal. Enduring it correctly mattered more. Injury did not mean rest. In the modern world, injury usually means rest and recovery. In medieval life, injury often meant continuing anyway. If you sprained an ankle, you still walked. If you injured your hand, you still worked. If you hurt your back, you adapted, but you didn't stop. Rest was a luxury few could afford. Minor injuries often became chronic pain that lasted a lifetime. People simply adjusted their expectations of comfort. Living with pain was normal. Living without pain was unusual. Aging meant living with constant pain. Old age in medieval times looked very different from today. There were no joint replacements, no physical therapy, no pain management. By the time people reached their 40s or 50s, if they were lucky enough to do so, they often lived with constant aches and stiffness. Arthritis, old injuries, worn joints, and chronic conditions were part of daily life. People did not expect aging to be comfortable. Pain was part of growing older. Emotional pain was also normalized. Physical pain wasn't the only suffering medieval people accepted. Grief was constant. Many lost siblings, children, parents, and spouses early. Death was familiar. There was little expectation of emotional recovery. You mourned, you prayed, and you continued. Mental health as we understand it didn't exist. Anxiety, depression, and trauma were real, but they were explained through spiritual or moral frameworks. Emotional pain was endured quietly, just like physical pain. Why medieval pain feels unimaginable today? The reason medieval pain feels shocking to us is not because people were stronger or weaker than we are. It's because expectations were different. Modern society is built around minimizing discomfort. Medieval society was built around survival. Pain was not an emergency. Pain was not a failure. Pain was not abnormal. It was life. Medical pain in medieval daily life, when healing hurt more than the illness. In medieval life, seeking medical help did not mean escaping pain. Very often, it meant inviting more of it. Medicine was not gentle. It was not comforting. And it was not designed to make patients feel better in the moment. Medieval medicine focused on balancing the body, not easing suffering. Pain was considered evidence that treatment was working. People did not expect doctors to remove pain. They expected doctors to explain it, and sometimes increase it. To understand medieval medical pain, you have to understand how people believed the body worked. The body was meant to hurt when something was wrong. Medieval medicine was built around the theory of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health meant balance. Illness meant imbalance. Pain was not the enemy. Pain was a signal that the body was reacting. If something hurt, it meant the body was struggling to restore balance. The doctor's job was not to block pain, but to guide the body, even if that guidance caused suffering. Reducing pain without fixing imbalance was seen as dangerous. It could hide illness rather than cure it. Because of this belief, pain relief was rarely the goal of treatment. Bloodletting, pain as prevention. Bloodletting was one of the most common medical procedures in medieval Europe. It was used for fevers, headaches, infections, fatigue, and even emotional distress. The logic was simple: too much blood caused imbalance. Removing it restored health. The procedure involved cutting a vein or using leeches. It was uncomfortable and frightening, but it was also routine. People did not see bloodletting as extreme. They saw it as responsible care. Some people were bled multiple times a year as a preventative measure. Pain from bloodletting was accepted calmly. Complaining was pointless. Everyone knew it hurt. What mattered was not comfort, but correction. Surgery without anesthesia. When surgery was necessary, pain was unavoidable. There was no true anesthesia. Alcohol, herbal mixtures, or physical restraint were the only tools available. Some patients were given poppy-based preparations, but these were unreliable and dangerous. Surgeons worked fast. Speed mattered more than precision, because the longer the procedure took, the more pain the patient endured. Being held down during surgery was common. Screaming was expected. This was not considered cruelty. It was considered reality. Survival mattered more than suffering. Wound treatment was intentionally painful. Treating wounds often meant causing pain on purpose. Burning wounds to stop bleeding or prevent infection was common. The pain was severe, but the belief was that intense pain meant the wound was being sealed and protected. Ointments were harsh. Many contained substances that burned, stung, or irritated the skin. If a treatment caused discomfort, it was often seen as more effective than something gentle. A treatment that did not hurt might be considered useless. Bone injuries and chronic pain. Broken bones were common, especially among labourists and soldiers. Setting a bone was extremely painful. No numbing agents. No imaging. Bones were pulled and pushed back into place by hand. If the bone healed incorrectly, that pain lasted a lifetime. Chronic pain from old injuries was normal. People did not expect full recovery. They expected adaptation. A limp, stiff fingers, or a weakened arm were not disabilities, they were evidence of survival. Infections meant prolonged suffering. Infections were among the most painful and feared conditions in medieval life. Without antibiotics, infections could last for weeks or months. Pain, swelling, fever, and weakness were endured until the body either recovered or didn't. Medical intervention was limited. Doctors might drain wounds, apply poultices, or attempt bloodletting to reduce internal heat. Pain relief was minimal. The idea of eliminating infection-related pain entirely was unimaginable. The best hope was survival. Painful remedies were trusted more. Medieval people often trusted painful remedies more than gentle ones. A bitter drink, a burning salve, or an uncomfortable procedure felt powerful. Pain signaled strength. Gentle treatments felt suspicious. This mindset extended into home remedies as well. Families passed down treatments that were unpleasant but familiar. Endurance was part of healing. If a remedy hurt, it must be doing something. Mental and emotional pain were medicalized differently. Emotional suffering was not separated from physical health. Sadness, fear, or anxiety could be treated as bodily imbalance. Treatments often involved fasting, purging, or bloodletting. Pain was still involved, even when the problem was emotional. The idea that mental pain deserved comfort rather than correction did not exist. Endurance was the solution. Doctors were not expected to be gentle. Modern doctors are judged by bedside manner. Medieval doctors were judged by authority and knowledge. A harsh doctor was not a bad doctor. Medical pain was not seen as cruelty. It was seen as seriousness. If treatment hurt, it meant the doctor was doing real work. Why people still sought medical help? With all this pain, why did medieval people still seek medical care? Because untreated illness was often worse. Pain from treatment was temporary. Pain from disease could be endless or fatal. People accepted medical pain the way they accepted work pain, as a necessary cost. Pain did not mean failure of medicine. In modern times, pain during treatment feels like a failure. In medieval times, pain meant the process was underway. Healing was not expected to be comfortable. It was expected to be hard. Pain, why suffering was seen as justice. In the medieval world, pain was not only normal, it was purposeful. Pain was used to teach. Pain was used to warn. Pain was used to maintain order. Law and punishment in medieval society were built on the belief that suffering corrected behavior. Justice was not about rehabilitation or fairness as we understand it today. It was about restoring balance, deterring wrongdoing, and showing consequences publicly. Pain was central to that system. Pain was meant to be seen. Punishment in medieval life was rarely private. Justice was public by design. The community was meant to watch, remember, and learn. Pain was a message, not just a penalty. If someone broke the law, their punishment needed to be visible enough to discourage others from doing the same. Quiet punishment was considered ineffective. This is why many penalties were carried out in public squares, markets, or churchyards, places where daily life happened. Pain reinforced social order. Everyday crimes brought physical pain. Many crimes that today result in fines or imprisonment resulted in physical punishment instead. Petty theft, dishonesty, or breaking local rules could lead to beatings, forced labor, or public humiliation involving physical discomfort. These punishments were not considered extreme. They were considered practical. Jails existed, but they were not designed for long-term imprisonment. Keeping people locked up required resources. Pain, on the other hand, was immediate and cheap. A short period of suffering was seen as better than ongoing confinement. Pain as moral correction. Medieval law was deeply connected to morality. Crime was not just a legal failure, it was a moral one. Pain was believed to cleanse wrongdoing. Suffering was thought to realign a person with social and moral expectations. If pain hurt enough, it would discourage future offenses. This belief made physical punishment feel justified, even necessary. Mercy without pain could be seen as weakness. Public humiliation was often physically uncomfortable. Not all punishment involved direct injury, but much of it involved prolonged discomfort. Standing for hours in uncomfortable positions, being exposed to weather, or being forced to remain still while the public stared, these were painful experiences even if they left no lasting marks. The discomfort mattered. Pain combined with shame reinforced obedience. Pain was normalized through repetition. Because punishment was public, people grew up watching it. Children saw adults punished. Adults saw neighbors punished. This repetition made pain familiar rather than shocking. Watching someone suffer was not considered cruel entertainment, it was civic education. This constant exposure lowered sensitivity to pain, both in others and in oneself. Pain and social class. Punishment pain was not equal across classes. Wealthy individuals could often pay fines or negotiate penalties. Poor people had fewer options. For the lower classes, physical punishment was common and expected. Pain reinforced social hierarchy. It reminded people of their position. This imbalance was accepted as normal, not unjust. Religious approval of punitive pain. Religion supported the idea that pain corrected behavior. Suffering was linked to repentance. Pain was believed to help cleanse sin. Punishment was not only legal, it was spiritual. Enduring pain quietly during punishment could be seen as a sign of humility and moral growth. Complaining too much could worsen one's reputation. Fear was part of daily life. Because punishment involved pain, fear was built into everyday behavior. People adjusted how they spoke, worked, and interacted to avoid crossing lines. Fear was not seen as unhealthy. It was seen as stabilizing. Pain-backed fear kept communities in order. Pain was not meant to be fair, it was meant to be effective. Medieval justice was not focused on proportionality in the modern sense. What mattered was whether punishment worked. If pain stopped crime, it was justified. If it scared others into obedience, it was successful. The idea that punishment should avoid suffering did not exist. Why people accepted punitive pain? Medieval people accepted painful punishment for the same reason they accepted painful work and painful medicine. It was familiar. It was expected. It was embedded in how society functioned. Life was harsh. Justice reflected that harshness. Pain was not separate from daily life. It was one of its tools. Pain as a social language. Pain communicated messages that words could not. It said, "This behavior is unacceptable. This order must be preserved. This authority will be enforced." People understood pain fluently. They did not need explanations. Religious suffering and voluntary pain, when pain was seen as holy. In medieval life, pain was not always something forced upon people. Sometimes, it was chosen. Religion shaped how medieval people understood the world, their bodies, and their suffering. Pain was not meaningless discomfort, it was spiritually significant. Enduring pain correctly could bring forgiveness, protection, or closeness to God. For many medieval believers, avoiding pain was not always the goal. Understanding it was. Pain had a purpose beyond the body. Medieval Christianity taught that earthly life was temporary and imperfect. The body was fragile, sinful, and prone to weakness. Pain was part of that weakness, but it could also be used to strengthen the soul. Suffering was often interpreted as a test of faith, a punishment meant to correct behavior, a way to imitate holy figures, a reminder of human humility. Pain forced people to think about their spiritual condition. Comfort, by contrast, could make someone careless. Because of this belief, pain was often accepted without protest. Endurance was a moral skill. Enduring pain calmly was considered a virtue. Patience during suffering showed obedience to God. Complaining too much could be seen as a lack of faith. This did not mean people enjoyed pain. It meant they believed it revealed something about their character. A person who endured pain quietly was admired. A person who constantly tried to escape it might be viewed with suspicion. Pain was a test, and tests mattered. Voluntary discomfort was spiritually valuable. Many medieval religious practices involved deliberate discomfort. Fasting was common. People denied themselves food not only during major religious periods but also as personal acts of devotion. Hunger pain was seen as a way to discipline desire. Long periods of prayer involved kneeling, standing, or remaining still in uncomfortable positions. Physical strain was accepted as part of devotion. Pilgrimages required walking long distances under difficult conditions. Sore feet, exhaustion, and illness were expected. The difficulty of the journey increased its spiritual value. If devotion was easy, it meant less. The body was meant to be controlled. Medieval religion emphasized control over the body. The body wanted comfort, food, rest, and pleasure. The soul needed discipline. Pain helped keep the body in check. Discomfort reminded people that spiritual goals mattered more than physical ease. This belief made physical suffering meaningful instead of pointless. The goal was not harm, it was mastery. Illness was often seen as a spiritual message. When people became sick or injured, they did not always see it as random. Illness could be interpreted as a warning, a correction, a call to repentance, a reminder of mortality. Pain forced reflection. Rather than immediately seeking relief, people often turned first to prayer, confession, or ritual. Religious response did not replace medicine, but it framed how pain was understood. Healing did not mean the end of pain. Even when people recovered from illness, pain was not erased from memory. Suffering was often remembered as meaningful. Surviving pain strengthened faith rather than resentment. Some people believed that pain endured on earth reduced suffering after death. This made endurance feel worthwhile. Pain was temporary. The soul was eternal. Religious community reinforced acceptance of pain. Medieval religious life was communal. People prayed together, fasted together, and suffered together. Shared discomfort created belonging. When everyone around you accepted pain as normal, resisting it felt unnecessary. Religious leaders reinforced these values through sermons and teachings. Pain was explained, framed, and normalized. Comfort was not a right. Modern life treats comfort as something people deserve. Medieval religion did not. Comfort was a blessing, not an expectation. Pain was not considered unjust simply because it existed. This belief reduced the sense of unfairness we associate with suffering today. Pain was part of God's order, even if it was difficult to understand. Fear of death made pain easier to accept. Death was always close in medieval life. Disease, accidents, and childbirth made mortality visible. Pain reminded people of death, but it also reminded them to prepare for it. Suffering encouraged repentance and reflection. It pushed people toward religious practice. In that sense, pain was a warning with purpose. Pain did not cancel faith. Experiencing pain did not mean faith had failed. In fact, pain could confirm faith. If suffering existed even among the faithful, it meant life was working as expected. This belief helped people endure long periods of hardship without feeling abandoned. Why voluntary pain made sense? To modern minds, choosing discomfort seems strange. To medieval believers, it was logical. Pain focused attention, reduced distraction, strengthened discipline, demonstrated devotion. It turned suffering into meaning. Fear, discipline, and daily obedience, how pain shaped medieval behavior. In medieval life, pain was not just something people experienced. It was something they planned around. Pain shaped how people behaved, how they made decisions, and how they judged risk. Because pain was common and consequences were harsh, people learned discipline early. Fear was not considered unhealthy. Fear was considered practical. Fear was a survival tool. Modern society often treats fear as something to overcome. In the medieval world, fear kept people alive. Fear of injury kept people cautious with tools. Fear of punishment kept people obedient. Fear of hunger kept people working. Pain made these fears real. People did not need abstract rules. They had seen what happened when rules were broken. Pain enforced memory. Fear was not shameful, it was sensible. Discipline was learned through consequences. Discipline in medieval life was not taught gently. Mistakes had consequences, and those consequences often hurt. If you damaged equipment, disobeyed authority, or failed in your duties, punishment was immediate and physical. This applied to children, apprentices, servants, and workers. The goal was not cruelty. The goal was control. Pain corrected behavior faster than explanation. Obedience was safer than resistance. Challenging authority was dangerous. People learned early that resistance could lead to suffering, not just for themselves, but for their families. This reinforced obedience as the safest choice. Pain created predictability. If you followed the rules, life was hard but survivable. If you broke them, it became worse. This calculation shaped daily behavior. Routine reduced pain. Routine was a defense mechanism. People followed strict daily patterns because deviation carried risk. Familiar actions reduced accidents, mistakes, and punishment. Routine minimized pain. This made medieval life feel rigid, but rigidity provided safety. Emotional control was necessary. Expressing anger, frustration, or despair openly could bring consequences. Emotional restraint was a survival skill. People learned to endure discomfort quietly because complaining did not change outcomes, and could make things worse. Pain taught silence. Children were trained for hardship. Children were raised with the expectation that life would be difficult. They were not shielded from pain. They were prepared for it. This did not mean parents did not care. It meant they believed strength came from endurance. Comfort was not the goal. Survival was. Toughness was learned, not inherent. Medieval people were not born tougher than modern people. They were trained by environment. When pain is unavoidable, you learn how to live with it. When pain is familiar, it loses some of its power. Tolerance replaced avoidance. Risk was calculated differently. People accepted levels of risk that seem extreme today because alternatives were limited. Avoiding pain entirely was impossible. The question was which pain was manageable. This mindset shaped decisions about work, travel, and conflict. Pain defined normalcy. What we would call suffering, medieval people called normal. A day without pain was not expected. A day with manageable pain was a good day. This baseline shaped emotional resilience. Authority used pain strategically. Those in power understood pain's effectiveness. They did not need constant force, only the memory of it. Pain created self-regulation. People monitored themselves to avoid consequences. Fear maintained order even when authority was absent. Why this system endured? A society built on pain and discipline lasted because it worked within its conditions. Limited resources, constant threats, and fragile systems required strict control. Pain was not accidental. It was functional. Aging, disability, and lifelong pain, living with a body that never fully healed. In medieval life, pain did not end when work slowed down. It followed people into old age. There was no clear line between being healthy and being disabled. Bodies wore down slowly, unevenly, and permanently. Pain accumulated year after year, becoming part of a person's identity rather than a condition to fix. Living long enough to feel old was itself an achievement. Aging was visible and physical. Medieval aging showed itself through pain. Joints stiffened. Backs bent. Hands lost strength. Old injuries resurfaced. Cold weather made everything worse. There were no treatments to slow this process. No therapies to restore movement. No expectation that aging could be comfortable. Pain was not a medical problem, it was a natural stage of life. People expected their bodies to hurt more as they aged, just as they expected their eyesight to fade. Injuries never fully healed. Many medieval people carried pain from injuries they suffered decades earlier. A badly healed bone, a twisted joint, or a damaged muscle could cause lifelong discomfort. Because people could not afford to rest properly, injuries often healed imperfectly. These lingering pains were common and accepted. Living with pain did not make someone sick. It made them normal. Disability was integrated into daily life. Medieval society did not have modern ideas of disability. If someone could still contribute, they were expected to do so, regardless of pain or limitation. People adjusted their work rather than stopping it. A person with limited mobility might take on lighter tasks. Someone with chronic pain might work more slowly. There was no expectation of accommodation. Adaptation was personal, not institutional. Pain did not remove social value. Pain alone did not reduce a person's worth. If you could still work, advise, teach, or contribute, you remained part of the community. Pain was not a reason to withdraw from life. This made endurance socially meaningful. Continuing despite pain earned respect. Elderly pain was normalized. Old people were expected to hurt. Complaining constantly about pain was discouraged, not because pain was ignored, but because it was expected. Elders were respected for what they had survived. Pain was proof of experience. Care came from family, not medicine. When pain became too severe, care came from family or community, not doctors. Pain relief was limited. Comfort came through rest, warmth, food, and companionship. There was no idea of pain management as a right. Relief was welcome, but not guaranteed. Emotional response to lifelong pain. Living with constant pain shaped personality. People became patient, reserved, and cautious. Endurance was admired more than expression. Pain taught restraint. This does not mean medieval people were unemotional. It means they learned to contain suffering rather than expect it to be removed. Death was not the ultimate failure. Because pain increased with age, death was not always feared as much as prolonged suffering. Dying after a long life of endurance could be seen as natural rather than tragic. Pain made mortality familiar. Why chronic pain was accepted? Chronic pain was accepted because there was no alternative. Hope was placed in faith, routine, and meaning, not cure. When pain is permanent, you stop asking when it will end and start asking how to live with it. Contrast with modern expectations. Modern society treats chronic pain as a problem to solve. Medieval society treated it as a condition to endure. This difference shaped attitudes toward aging, patience, and resilience. Pain then vs comfort now. Why medieval life feels unimaginable today. When we compare medieval pain to modern discomfort, the difference is not just medical. It is psychological. It is cultural. It is about expectations. Medieval people did not live in constant agony, but they lived in constant awareness that pain could appear at any moment, and often did. Modern life is built to reduce friction. Medieval life was built to survive it. Comfort was rare and not promised. In the medieval world, comfort was not a goal of society. Houses were cold. Beds were hard. Work was exhausting. Travel was punishing. Food was inconsistent. No one promised relief. People hoped for stability, not ease. A day without major pain was a blessing, not an expectation. Today, even mild discomfort feels wrong because comfort has become normal. Pain was not medicalized. Modern culture treats pain as a medical emergency. Medieval culture treated pain as a condition of existence. People did not immediately ask, "How do I stop this?" They asked, "Can I still work? Can I still pray? Can I still function?" If the answer was yes, pain was tolerated. The threshold for too much was higher. Because pain was common, medieval people developed a higher tolerance for it. This did not mean they felt less pain. It meant they interpreted it differently. Pain did not automatically signal danger. Often, it simply signaled life continuing as usual. Modern people experience less pain, but react more strongly to it because it is unexpected. Modern discomfort would have seemed luxurious. Many things we complain about today would have seemed minor, or even pleasant, to medieval people. Soft beds, regular meals, warm clothing, clean water, predictable routines. Even minor aches today are treated with urgency because we expect relief. Medieval people expected endurance. Pain shaped identity. Pain was part of how medieval people understood themselves. Your aches told the story of your labor. Your scars marked survival. Your endurance defined your worth. Pain was not separate from identity, it was woven into it. Modern identity is shaped more by comfort, choice, and self-expression. Why medieval people seem tougher? Medieval people were not biologically tougher. They were trained by circumstance. When pain is unavoidable, resilience develops naturally. When pain is rare, tolerance decreases. This is not weakness, it is adaptation. Safety changed everything. Modern safety standards removed countless sources of pain. Tools are safer. Work is regulated. Medicine reduces suffering. Food is reliable. These changes didn't just reduce pain, they changed how humans relate to their bodies. Pain became abnormal. The psychological shift. Perhaps the biggest difference is mental. Medieval people accepted pain as meaningful or inevitable. Modern people often see pain as unfair or fixable. This shift shapes how suffering is experienced. Expectation changes perception. What we gained and lost. We gained longer lives, greater comfort, and reduced suffering. But we lost familiarity with endurance. Medieval people lived closer to their physical limits. Modern people live closer to their comfort limits. Neither is inherently better, but they are profoundly different. What medieval pain teaches us: the cost of survival and the meaning of endurance. When we step back and look at medieval life as a whole, one truth becomes unavoidable. Pain was not an exception. Pain was not a crisis. Pain was the background of existence. From childhood to old age, pain shaped how people worked, believed, obeyed, aged, and understood themselves. It influenced laws, religion, medicine, family life, and social order. Medieval society did not function despite pain, it functioned through it. And that reality teaches us something important about human history. Pain was the price of stability. Medieval life was unstable in almost every way. Food could disappear. Disease could strike without warning. War could reach your village overnight. In such a world, pain became a constant, but predictable, force. Pain was easier to accept than chaos. If pain came from work, punishment, prayer, or aging, it meant the world was still operating within known rules. That predictability mattered more than comfort. Endurance was a survival skill. Endurance was not heroic in medieval life. It was practical. People who endured pain without panic survived longer, worked longer, and remained useful to their communities. Endurance was taught early, reinforced daily, and respected socially. Pain shaped behavior because it had to. Meaning made pain bearable. What made medieval pain survivable was not strength, it was meaning. Pain meant you were contributing. You were correcting behavior. You were proving faith. You were aging naturally. You were still alive. When pain has meaning, it becomes something you live with rather than something that breaks you. This meaning did not remove suffering, but it gave it structure. The modern world changed the rules. Modern society did something radical. It treated pain as a problem to solve. Medicine focused on relief. Law reduced physical punishment. Work became safer. Comfort became expected. Pain moved from normal to abnormal. This shift transformed human experience, but it also changed how we respond to discomfort. Less pain, less tolerance. As pain decreased, tolerance decreased with it. This is not a failure. It is adaptation. Humans adjust to their environment. Medieval people adapted to hardship. Modern people adapted to comfort. Neither group was weaker or stronger, just shaped differently. Why medieval pain still matters. Understanding medieval pain is not about glorifying suffering. It is about understanding what human beings can endure when they must, and how societies build meaning around hardship. Pain shaped civilization because it forced structure, discipline, belief, and cooperation. Without pain, medieval society could not have functioned as it did. A quiet truth about progress. Progress reduced pain, but it also removed a shared experience that once united people across class, age, and belief. Everyone hurt. Everyone endured. Everyone understood. Pain was the great equalizer. What we carry forward. We do not need to return to medieval suffering to learn from it. But understanding how people once lived with pain helps us see comfort for what it is, a recent privilege, not a human default. It also reminds us that resilience is learned, not inherited. Hidden pains and lessons from medieval life. Even after exploring work, medicine, religion, punishment, aging, and daily discipline, there are still aspects of medieval pain that often go unnoticed. Some were subtle. Some were social. Some were environmental. And all of them shaped human experience in ways we rarely appreciate today. Pain in medieval life was not only physical, it was everywhere, often invisible, and socially woven into expectations, survival, and culture. Social pain, shame, humiliation, and community pressure. Medieval people lived in tight-knit communities. Everyone knew your business, your successes, and your failures. Shame was a form of pain that could cut deeper than a blade. Being publicly criticized, gossiped about, or punished in front of others could create psychological stress that lasted far longer than any physical injury. For example, someone caught stealing or lying might not only face a beating, they might be mocked for weeks or months. The memory of that embarrassment influenced behavior far more effectively than any single act of punishment. Social pain was constant. It guided behavior, reinforced norms, and shaped self-identity. People endured not just physical pain, they endured judgment and expectation. Environmental pain, weather, housing, and daily hardship. Pain was not always caused by work, punishment, or illness. The environment itself was often a source of suffering. Homes were poorly insulated. Winters were harsh. Beds were hard, and heating was minimal. People slept on straw mattresses or wooden boards, exposed to drafts and cold. Dampness and mold could make joints ache or worsen respiratory issues. Even small daily tasks could be painful because of environmental conditions. Fetching water from a distant well, walking on uneven roads, carrying firewood or heavy goods, everyday life involved constant minor discomfort. These environmental pains were largely accepted as normal, forming the baseline of what medieval people considered ordinary life. Psychological pain, anxiety, uncertainty, and fear. Medieval life was unpredictable. Wars, raids, famines, and disease outbreaks were common. Death was familiar. Uncertainty was everywhere. This created a constant background of psychological stress. People worried about food, shelter, family safety, and survival. Anxiety was normalized. Mental strain was endured silently, because expressing it openly was often discouraged or seen as weak. Pain, in this sense, was mental as much as physical, and medieval people developed coping mechanisms that relied on faith, routine, and social support. Pain as a tool of control and culture. Beyond survival, pain was a tool used by society to maintain order. Religious institutions used fasting, penance, and ritual suffering to guide morality. Legal systems relied on corporal punishment to enforce obedience. Social norms encouraged endurance as a sign of virtue. Pain was embedded in culture. Enduring it correctly was a mark of identity, belonging, and moral standing. Lessons for modern life. What can we learn from medieval pain today? Resilience is learned, not inherited. Pain was unavoidable, and people developed tolerance because they had to. Meaning changes suffering. Pain that served a purpose, spiritual, moral, or social, was easier to endure than random or pointless pain. Comfort shapes expectations. Modern life reduces pain, but it also lowers our tolerance for minor discomfort. Understanding the past can help us approach challenges with perspective. Shared struggle builds community. Many medieval pains were collective, work, rituals, and public ordeals, which reinforced bonds and shared responsibility. Hidden strengths of medieval people. Medieval people were neither stoic heroes nor mindless sufferers. They were practical and adaptive. They knew pain would come. They planned around it. They endured it, integrated it into daily life, and even gave it meaning. In doing so, they created societies that could survive harsh conditions for centuries. Pain was not just endured, it was understood, measured, and managed within the limits of knowledge and environment. Modern reflections: what medieval pain teaches us about resilience and humanity. Looking back across the medieval world, one pattern becomes clear. pain was constant, structured, and unavoidable. It shaped daily life, work, family, religion, law, and aging. But it also shaped the human spirit. It taught people endurance, patience, and perspective, qualities we sometimes take for granted today. Medieval people lived in a world where pain was expected, understood, and meaningful. They didn't chase comfort. They didn't complain endlessly. They learned how to live with suffering as a natural part of existence. Pain as a teacher. Pain in medieval life served a purpose. It wasn't only a warning or a consequence, it was a teacher. It taught children to work and obey. It taught adults to navigate risk, labor, and social hierarchy. It taught the elderly to endure chronic aches with patience. It taught communities to respect rules, norms, and rituals. In this sense, pain was functional. It guided behavior, reinforced social order, and created resilience at both individual and collective levels. Modern lessons from medieval endurance. Even though modern life is far more comfortable, medieval pain has lessons for us. Resilience is built, not innate. Endurance grows in environments that challenge you. Meaning reduces suffering. Pain that has purpose, physical, spiritual, or social, is more bearable than random discomfort. Shared challenges create community. Collective struggle builds bonds and trust. Perspective matters. Modern complaints about minor discomforts contrast sharply with the daily endurance of medieval life. By studying how people lived with constant pain, we can better understand our own thresholds and appreciate the comfort we often take for granted. Endurance and humanity. Medieval people were not stoic in the sense of being emotionless. They felt pain, loss, fear, and grief, but they integrated it into life rather than letting it stop them. Their endurance was practical, spiritual, and social. This endurance reminds us that human beings are adaptable. We learn to survive, to thrive, and even to find meaning in suffering, if we must. Why it matters today. Understanding medieval pain is more than historical curiosity. It is a mirror to modern life. It challenges our assumptions about comfort and toughness. It highlights how culture, belief, and expectation shape perception of suffering. It teaches that resilience is learned through experience, not just inherited genetics. Even as society removes sources of suffering, knowing how humans once lived with pain can inspire perspective, gratitude, and mental strength. Medieval pain, what we can apply today. Even though medieval life was centuries ago, the way people experienced and responded to pain has lessons that are surprisingly relevant today. Is about taking the history we've explored and turning it into insights for modern life. Endurance is learned, not innate. Medieval people weren't inherently stronger than us, they were trained by circumstance. Daily hardships, exposure to labor, injury, illness, and social expectations shaped their resilience. For us, this means endurance can be developed. Facing manageable challenges regularly, whether in work, exercise, or personal projects, teaches patience and resilience. Comfort is valuable, but it doesn't teach toughness. Pain gains meaning when it serves a purpose. In medieval life, pain was rarely meaningless. Bloodletting, fasting, punishment, or long labor had a reason, whether practical, moral, or spiritual. Today, we often see discomfort as negative, but if we frame it as part of a goal, like exercise, learning, or personal growth, it becomes tolerable and even empowering. Meaning changes perception. Purpose transforms suffering from a burden into a tool. Shared hardship builds community. Medieval people endured many hardships collectively. Work, religious rituals, punishment, and survival challenges were experienced alongside others. Pain became a social glue, reinforcing bonds and shared responsibility. In modern life, shared challenges, team projects, group training, or community work can recreate some of that cohesion. Struggle connects people. Comfort alone rarely does. Expect discomfort, don't fear it. One reason medieval pain was bearable was expectation. People didn't waste energy complaining about what they knew was inevitable. They planned around it. Today, we often react strongly to minor discomforts because we expect everything to be easy. Accepting that life includes difficulty can reduce stress and increase adaptability. Gratitude for comfort. Finally, reflecting on medieval pain makes modern comfort tangible. Heating, medicine, reliable food, safety, and even ergonomic chairs are luxuries medieval people rarely enjoyed. Appreciating what we have doesn't mean seeking pain. It means understanding how far human society has come and valuing resilience in its absence. Comparing medieval pain across history, why the Middle Ages were unique. Medieval life was painful, but it wasn't the only time humans experienced suffering. Ancient civilizations, early modern Europe, and even pre-industrial societies all had their own forms of hardship. Yet the Middle Ages were distinctive in how pain was normalized, structured, and socially integrated. Pain was both common and visible. Unlike in some ancient societies, medieval pain was often public and communal. Punishments were carried out in public squares. Laborers worked side by side, sharing physical strain. Religious rituals and fasting were observed collectively. This made suffering a shared experience, reinforcing social norms. In contrast, in some earlier or later periods, much suffering was private, hidden by households, elites, or slaves. Chronic and cumulative pain defined daily life. In medieval Europe, everyday pain was cumulative. Physical labor from childhood to old age. Infections without effective treatment. Malnutrition or harsh weather. Old injuries that never healed. Few societies had such a combination of environmental, occupational, and social pain affecting nearly everyone. Later societies, with industrialization and modern medicine, reduced daily physical suffering, though industrial labor introduced new forms of strain. The role of belief in enduring pain. Religion and culture gave medieval pain meaning. Pain was moral, spiritual, or corrective. Endurance was a social virtue. Chronic discomfort was framed as part of life's order. This framing was different from ancient Greece or Rome, where philosophy sometimes encouraged stoicism, but physical suffering wasn't as socially structured or ritualized. How pain shaped society. Pain was not merely personal. It influenced social structures. Labor expectations were built around endurance. Laws relied on pain to enforce obedience. Religion intertwined with suffering to maintain moral order. The unique combination of environmental, social, and moralized pain made medieval society function in ways that other periods did not. Lessons from historical comparison. Looking at medieval pain in historical context teaches us. Pain is culturally framed. How societies interpret it changes behavior. Public, shared suffering can reinforce community norms. Endurance can be both survival strategy and social expectation. Reduction of pain is not only a medical issue, it transforms society. Medieval pain and the human spirit, endurance as identity. Beyond work, punishment, medicine, and religion, medieval pain shaped something deeper, the human spirit. It wasn't just endured, it was integrated into identity, character, and social standing. Pain in medieval life was unavoidable. Yet, people found ways to survive, adapt, and even thrive despite it. This endurance became a defining feature of life. Pain as a measure of strength. In the Middle Ages, how one handled suffering was a measure of personal strength. Physical pain from labor, injury, or punishment showed stamina. Chronic ailments from aging or disease demonstrated resilience. Religious fasting and penance reflected moral discipline. Endurance was respected. Those who could tolerate discomfort without complaint were often admired and trusted. Stories of endurance. Many historical accounts, whether from chronicles, letters, or religious texts, highlight ordinary people enduring extraordinary pain. Laborious working long hours in cold, wet fields. Soldiers marching into battle with injuries and exhaustion. Pilgrims walking hundreds of miles, enduring hunger, weather, and sickness. These were not exceptional heroes, they were regular people navigating life as it was. Their endurance was practical, not performative. Pain shaped identity and morality. Suffering was more than physical, it was moral and social. Enduring pain quietly could elevate social standing. Complaining excessively could be seen as weakness or lack of faith. Pain was integrated into daily choices, behavior, and societal roles. This framework helped people understand themselves and their place in the world. Pain was not random, it was meaningful. Endurance built resilience. By constantly navigating discomfort, medieval people developed mental, emotional, and social resilience. They anticipated pain in daily routines. They learned to manage it in practical ways. They integrated suffering into faith, work, and family life. Resilience was not optional, it was necessary for survival. Modern reflections. We rarely experience life with this level of constant, structured hardship today. Yet studying medieval endurance teaches us. Pain shapes character when framed with purpose. Consistent challenge builds mental toughness. Shared hardship strengthens community and identity. The human spirit adapts. Historically, culturally, and personally, to whatever challenges life presents. Medieval pain, the complete picture and modern lessons. After exploring daily labor, medical challenges, punishment, religion, aging, social pressure, and endurance, one thing is clear: pain defined medieval life. It was physical, emotional, social, and spiritual. It shaped how people worked, believed, aged, obeyed, and understood themselves. Pain was not a temporary inconvenience. It was constant, structured, and meaningful. Pain as a social and cultural force. Medieval pain was deeply tied to community and culture. Work and labor structured daily schedules and social expectations. Punishment enforced rules and moral order. Religion framed voluntary and involuntary suffering as meaningful. Aging and illness normalized chronic discomfort. Pain reinforced identity, obedience, and cohesion. It was not just endured, it was understood and integrated. Pain as a teacher and guide. Across all aspects of life, pain served a purpose. Discipline. Pain taught people how to follow rules, work efficiently, and respect authority. Moral guidance. Suffering was often interpreted spiritually, encouraging faith and ethical behavior. Resilience. Repeated exposure built endurance, patience, and practical wisdom. Community. Shared hardship bonded people and reinforced social norms. Pain wasn't a mere obstacle, it was a tool for shaping human behavior. Endurance defined identity. People were admired for their ability to endure. Strength was measured in how they managed suffering, not in their wealth or status alone. Laborious, soldiers, and pilgrims demonstrated physical endurance. Elders showed patience and resilience. Religious devotees practiced voluntary suffering to refine character. Endurance became a social and personal identity marker. Modern reflections. Comparing medieval and modern life highlights striking contrasts. Today, we expect comfort and minimal pain. Chronic discomfort is seen as abnormal, even unjust. Yet, modern life often lacks the resilience and perspective that everyday pain once built. Medieval people teach us that pain is not merely negative. It can build character, reinforce social bonds, and provide perspective. Lessons for today. Resilience is cultivated, not innate. Repeated, manageable challenges strengthen endurance. Meaning matters. Framing discomfort with purpose makes it tolerable. Shared struggle strengthens communities. Collective hardship fosters empathy and cooperation. Perspective transforms suffering. Recognizing how past generations lived with constant pain gives us gratitude and insight. Applying medieval lessons on pain and endurance today. Medieval people lived with constant pain, physical, social, and emotional. While we don't need to replicate their hardships, there are lessons from their endurance and perspective that are still valuable in modern life. Embrace challenges to build resilience. In medieval life, daily hardship was unavoidable. Endurance was not optional, it was a survival skill. Modern life often removes challenges for comfort. While this is beneficial, it can reduce mental toughness. Deliberately embracing manageable challenges, whether through exercise, learning, or personal projects, can strengthen resilience. Pain and discomfort, framed correctly, become tools for growth. Reframe discomfort with meaning. Medieval people rarely endured pain without purpose. Fasting, punishment, long labor, or injury had social, moral, or spiritual meaning. In today's context, discomfort feels easier to bear when it's linked to a goal. Whether it's studying, training, or creative work, understanding the why behind challenges changes how we experience them. Pain becomes a teacher rather than an enemy. Recognize the role of community. Many medieval hardships were collective. Work, punishment, rituals, and survival tasks were often shared. This fostered cooperation, empathy, and social cohesion. Even today, facing challenges alongside others strengthens relationships and creates shared purpose. Team projects, group activities, or community work can recreate some of this social resilience. Cultivate perspective. Medieval people endured far more than most modern humans experience, yet they integrated suffering into life without losing purpose. Reflecting on their reality can help us appreciate modern comfort, develop patience, and gain perspective on our own struggles. Minor discomforts often feel worse simply because they are unexpected or abnormal. Accept pain as part of life. Finally, one of the greatest lessons is acceptance. Pain is inevitable in some form, whether physical, emotional, or social. The medieval approach teaches us that pain does not have to dominate life. It can coexist with purpose, learning, and growth. Endurance, perspective, and adaptation are timeless human skills. Understanding and practicing them can make life richer and less overwhelming. Medieval pain, endurance, meaning, and human resilience. After exploring 15 detailed sections, one truth stands out. Pain defined medieval life in every aspect. It shaped labor, punishment, medicine, religion, aging, social norms, and even identity itself. Pain was constant, structured, and meaningful, woven into the very fabric of society. Yet it was not merely endured. Medieval people learned from it, adapted to it, and allowed it to shape character, community, and culture. Pain as a teacher across all dimensions. Physical, long hours, hard labor, injuries, disease, and environmental hardships demanded constant endurance. Social, shame, humiliation, and community expectations created emotional and psychological pressure. Moral and spiritual, religious practices like fasting, penance, and voluntary suffering gave pain meaning. Aging and chronic illness, lifelong discomfort became a normal and accepted part of life. Pain was integrated into survival, morality, and identity. It was not random, it was functional. Endurance defined identity. Strength was measured not by wealth or status, but by ability to endure hardship. Laborers proved stamina. Elders demonstrated patience. Pilgrims and religious devotees reflected moral and spiritual discipline. Endurance became both a personal and social marker, a way to navigate life and maintain cohesion within communities. Lessons for modern life. Even though we live in a world of comfort, the medieval approach to pain offers timeless lessons. Resilience is learned. Exposure to manageable challenges builds strength. Meaning transforms suffering. Purpose reframes discomfort into growth. Shared struggles bond communities. Collective hardship fosters trust and cooperation. Perspective matters. Recognizing historical endurance gives gratitude and patience. Acceptance is powerful. Pain can coexist with life without overwhelming it. Pain as a guide. Medieval life teaches that pain is not merely a burden, it is a guide, a teacher, and a measure of human adaptability. It forces reflection, builds resilience, and shapes identity. When understood, pain becomes meaningful rather than arbitrary. The legacy of medieval endurance. By studying medieval pain, we see how humans can survive, adapt, and find purpose in hardship. It reminds us that resilience is cultivated through experience, not inherited. Pain, endurance, and adaptation were central to the survival and success of entire societies. Medieval people were not just survivors, they were masters of endurance, navigating daily challenges with pragmatism, faith, and meaning. Modern life shields us from much suffering, but the lessons of the medieval world remain valuable. Pain is inevitable, but it can teach. Endurance is powerful and can be learned. Meaning transforms hardship into growth. Medieval life shows us that the human spirit is remarkably adaptable. Pain is not just something to endure, it is a teacher, a guide, and a defining part of what it means to be human.